to make sure?
All right, I'm good.
All right. I'm going to turn the mic.
All right, thanks, Debbie. Thank you, Victoria and Scott, for that lovely music. We're looking forward to a little bit more music at the end here. And thank you, Marv, for that reading. I read that poem a few times, and my voice didn't do justice to it like Marv's does. Very, very nice. Thank you. And thank you, Debbie, for everything you do. So we're talking about love, as Victoria was singing about. We're talking about anchoring in God's love. And I'm going to tell you a few stories today that kind of speak to that. First one is about a guy named Archibald Cronin, A.J. Cronin. And he was a medical student. And he worked for one of the most distinguished surgeons in London. Very well-respected guy. Unfortunately, the guy was very grouchy, irritable, impatient, not a real good teacher. And he would say things to this A.J. Cronin like, "You will never be a surgeon. You are too inept, too clumsy." Now, isn't that just the way you want to be taught? You know, you're being taught to be a surgeon, and you're being told you'll never be a surgeon because you're inept. Anyway, so this Cronin ends up graduating at one of the top in his class. He did very well, and he took a job in the Western Highlands of Scotland. And he treated all kinds of people all the time, but if they needed surgery, he would send them elsewhere, some other town. Didn't want to do surgery. Why? Because he thought he was inept. He was afraid. He was discouraged by this, what his mentor had told him. And so it was a very stormy, yucky day, and this boy comes into his office and he says, "Doctor, you've got to come with me. The minister's son fell and is lying on the floor at his house, and he can't move. You've got to come with me." And they went 3 miles through this storm and yucky weather, and they got there, and what he found out is that this boy's legs were paralyzed as a result of 4 crushed vertebrae. Now, he knew that to fix that, it took a very delicate operation, very delicate surgery. Well, here he is, kind of in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a snowstorm, and of course, first thing he does is go to the phone to pick up, see who else could do this for him, because he can't do it. Phones are dead, trains aren't running. It's a situation. Well, as I mentioned, this kid was the minister's son. The minister's there, and the minister pulls him aside, and he said, "Dr. Cronin, you can do this. God will help you do this." And in a single moment, he grasped the confidence. He tuned into the flow, and he was courageous enough to do what he needed to do and what only he could do in that moment. Called on a local woman who worked as the anesthetist, and he just let those wise words of the minister overshadow that threat that he had gotten from his mentor, that you'll never be a surgeon. And he did the surgery, and it turned out okay. And here's what he had to say about it. He said, "All of a sudden, my hand grew steady. My mind grew cool. I felt confidence in myself. The operation was concluded. The healing had begun. I sat by the boy's bed with a sense of deep thanksgiving, because at last I too was free. The greatest experience of my life was when I walked into the other room and said to the family with Scottish understatement, 'I think he'll do.' He was going to be fine." And when I read this story about how suddenly this guy was able to do this surgery, suddenly something came upon him. Some of you know that when my kids' dad, my ex-husband from a million years ago, he was a big drinker. He drank for many, many years. And in the last 3 weeks of his life, he came back to Minnesota from spending like 40 years in Florida. And he was a body man. He fixed cars. He'd slap on quarter panels and paint them and all that kind of stuff. And he was good at it. And even drinking, he was able to keep that business and do his work. And I said to him when he was with me these last 3 weeks, and his hands, even though he hadn't drunk for several years, his hands shook terribly. He couldn't light a cigarette. I had to light his cigarettes for him in those last weeks of his life. He's out on my porch, and I'm lighting his cigarettes for him. And I said, well, how on earth? You were doing body work up until like 2 months ago. How did you paint cars with such tremors in your hands? And he said, when I painted, my hands didn't shake. Go figure. I mean, God works in mysterious ways. When I painted, my hands didn't shake. So things happen unbeknownst to us when we are open to them. So this month, we're talking about our reason for being. And really, the reason that we are here, the reason for all of our being is to let God, as you understand it, experience life in, through, and as you. That very power that created everything and everyone is the same power within each and every one of us, giving us power to create wonderful lives. And sometimes we hear these messages like this surgeon did, that you can't do it. My late husband, Gary, said that when he was a teenager, his dad would repeatedly tell him, you're a bum. You'll always be a bum. And how something like that you overcome, especially when it comes from someone that you love and respect, and they kind of kick you in the teeth. And in this story, you might think, well, yeah, the reason that this Cronin was able to operate is because this minister said, God is with you. And really the real reason is because God was with him. He was in touch. He finally connected with that power within himself. He connected to it, connected to something that was solid and sure and strong and steady and dependable. And that very power was within him. And that's what we're talking about, anchoring in God's love, anchoring to that strength, that peace, that power that is within us. And it is living, that power was living as him, and that power lives as us as well. Ernest Holmes, who is the founder of Science of Mind, he said, no matter what our emotional storm or what our objective situation may be, there's always something hidden in the inner being that has never been violated. Something in here never been violated. We may stumble, but always there is that eternal voice whispering within our ear, that thing which causes the eternal quest, that thing which forever sings and sings. Sometimes Ernest was very poetic in his prose. So it's my intention this morning, if you are not in touch with that power within, if you don't have that anchoring in love, my intention is to plant a seed that you can say, oh, I can do this. Nothing special has to happen. I don't need to be dunked in water. I don't need to go through any rituals. Right here and right now, you can say, yeah, I open my heart. I know that power that created everything is the power within me. And for those of us that have already kind of figured this out, my intention is that we deepen that idea that we have a higher power that will see us through anything. I like to say in my spiritual mind treatments, my affirmative prayers, This is a power that has the perfect solution to any perceived dilemma in life. What a power that we have within us. Perfect solution to anything in life. Charles Fillmore was a gentleman that started the Unity movement, the Unity Church. And he wrote something called Talks on Truth. And in that he said this: "We may talk about the wisdom of God, but the love of God must be felt in the heart. It cannot be described, and one who has not felt it can have no concept of it from the description of others. But the more we talk about love, the stronger it grows in the consciousness, and if we persist in thinking loving thoughts and speaking loving words, we are sure to bring into our experience the feeling of that great love that is beyond description, the very love of God." So I'm going to tell another story that I think will bring home this idea that that you have this connection with your higher power and how important that is. There was a famous research scientist, and he made all kinds of really important breakthroughs in science. And a newspaper reporter was interviewing him, and he said, you know, what makes you this person that can do these things that others seemingly can't do? What do you think your secret has been? What has affected you? And he said, when I was a little kid, my mother always lifted me up. He said, as a matter of fact, he said, when I was a little boy, 3-4 years old, I was trying to grab a bottle of milk out of the refrigerator. This little guy with little hands trying to grab this bottle of milk out of the fridge. And of course he grabs it and it falls on the floor and it dumps all over the floor. And his mother, she said, this reminds me of me, so patient and loving and wise. "What a wonderful mess you've made. I've rarely seen such a huge puddle of milk. Well, the damage is already done. Would you like to get down and play in this milk for a while?" I was doing that all the time as this patient mother that I was. So the little kid gets down, plays in the milk for a while, and then the mother says, whenever you make a mess like this, eventually you got to clean it up. She said, "How'd you like to do that? You want a towel or a sponge or a mop? Which do you prefer?" So they cleaned it up. And then she said, "What we've had here is a failed experiment in how to carry a big bottle of milk with 2 tiny hands. Let's go to the backyard, fill a bottle with water, and see if you can discover a way to carry it without dropping it." Again, she could have modeled this after me. So patient, so wise. So because of the mother's love and her wisdom, he thought that was what made him carry on. And I have to tell you, this reminds me of a story, a true story. My niece, my little niece, and she was probably that same age, 3-4 years old, and she was sitting in the living room with her dad, and he had a beverage on the chair, on the arm of the chair. He was sipping it, with one hand, and she was sitting on another little chair with a little glass of milk. And she was taking that glass of milk with one hand, and he said, "Jan, do not try to drink that take both hands and lift that glass up." And she said, "Well, you're drinking yours with one hand." And he said, "But Jan, your hands are little." And she sat there and she stewed, and she finally looked at him and she said, "These are big." Kind of a little aside. So these stories, whether it was about this Dr. Cronin who really learned to be confident as a surgeon through this kind of forced situation, but what it forced him to do is connect with that spirit within, and the idea of this scientist being able to make these medical breakthroughs through the love of his mother. And I'm sure that love penetrated within, and he had a connection with that power within him that allowed him to make mistakes, to charge through where other people were afraid. It didn't matter how many times he failed. And I'm going to tell you one more story about myself. When I was a sales assistant at a brokerage firm, and I was raising two kids, and they're getting bigger. Their shoes were getting more expensive. I'm thinking to myself, I gotta do something else. I'm not going to be able to afford to raise these kids. And I was already licensed, because I had to have my license working for these brokers, because I had to open accounts and run trades and stuff. And the guys were telling me, my brokers were telling me, why don't you get some business cards? Why don't you make some calls at night and see if you can open some accounts and you can make some extra money? I thought, well, that sounds like a good idea. So I ordered these business cards that said Joanne Bloom, that was my name at the time, registered representative. And I thought, well, if I talk to somebody, I got to send them out my card, etc. And so one day, these business cards came in, and they were lying on the receptionist's desk. And I don't know if you've ever seen boxes of business cards, but oftentimes they're just a box, and on the end, they'll have a picture of the card that's inside. And so one of the powers that be at the brokerage firm comes in, and he goes over to the receptionist desk. He lifts up that box. He sees what it says, Joanne Bloom, registered rep. He picks up that box. He walks over to my desk where I sit with my typewriter, and he flips that box over onto my desk, and he says, little girls playing big business. Now, he might as well told me, just like that surgeon told his, you're inept. Yeah. How on earth can you ever do something like this? And it kind of hit me hard, and yet I have to say, him saying that was probably the most instrumental thing that kept me trying, kept me working, kept me getting up in the morning, kept me coming to work, kept me making the calls, because I wanted to show him. I wanted to prove that it wasn't just a little girl playing big business. And at that time then, and one of the reasons that I was able to do that is because I had fervently prayed before I ever made that decision. I had fervently prayed for guidance. I got these kids to raise, higher power. How am I going to do that? Show me, guide me, give me an urge. And that was the urge, brought on by the suggestion of the brokers that I worked for. Get some cards, make some calls. And I was confident in that prayer, that I prayed that prayer, and I really had an urge to do this. I was supposed to be getting a draw. And then when I talked to my sales manager, finally, I said, what about if I fold up my typewriter, and what if I just go into production? He said, go for it. So that was very exciting, and he said, well, what I'll do is I'll give you a draw of $500 a month. Now, a draw means you got to pay it back at some time. And I thought, well, that's practically what I'm making now. I think that, if I run a few trades, I should be able to do this. And then the week before I was to start in production was the end of 1974. He called me in his office and he said, well, the powers that be said no draw. No draw, just straight commission coming out of the chute. And because I was all prayed up, because I was so sure of the guidance and the power and that connection I had, it never occurred to me to say, oh boy, then I better not do it. Never occurred to me. And so I just think that for all of us, when we're thinking about this today, that even though I was taken aback by that comment, it didn't destroy me, because I was prayed up. I had that connection with that power within. And it anchored me, it upheld me, it strengthened me, it got me through. And I just want to encourage each and every person here. We all have that power within. It's within each and every one of us. Sometimes we've not been aware of it, not noticed it, not used it, but it is there. So I would like to encourage that. May that power just be within you and grow today. So with that, I'd like to close with a spiritual mind treatment, which is simply an affirmative prayer around these words that I've spoken about, anchoring in God's love. So just take a deep breath. Relax. Nowhere else to be right now. Just open your heart. As I speak these words in first person, as though they're for me, but they're for everybody. I know there's one power in the universe, and I know that power is all there is. It is love, it is peace, it is power, balance, order. It's all good, and it does have the perfect solution to any perceived dilemma in life. And I know I am one with it. It experiences life in, through, and as its creation, in, through, and as me, in through, and each as life. We tend to sometimes face challenges. We have to make difficult choices. We've got doubts, we've got fears. Even though I remember that I am here to let my higher power experience life in, through, and as me, to anchor in love with that very power. I may stumble, but always there's that eternal voice forever whispering in my ear, encouraging me, uplifting me, strengthening me. I'm grateful that these words are powerful and they're true, and I'm grateful to the law which does the work. I release these words for perfect manifestation. So it is.